Hi, this is Jonas. Recently I had a buddy asking me how to configure HCX between an on-prem VMware environment and VMware Cloud and AWS. So here's the video. Not an official video, so use at your own risk, etc. But there are many ways of doing this. So let's look at a few architectures. You can do everything across the internet, the L2 extension included. You could have a DX line, direct connect. Or you could have a split of the two, so you have the L2 extension over the internet and the VPN for the rest. And you can do what I do here, which is a VPN to a TGW, which pairs with a vTGW and then connects to the SDDC. So we're going to start off. I want to use a private connection for this, so I will change my vCenter to use a private IP. So this is the VMware Cloud and AWS console, and you can leave it public if you want to go and do everything over the internet. But in this case, I want to push this over a VPN tunnel, so I'm going to change this setting to start with. It's very easy, just go into settings for your SDDC and flip the switch here to the private address. And then we also enable HCX, since that's an add-on. It's just essentially a one push deploy on the cloud side at the very least. And that starts now. It takes a little while to do, but we're going to do other stuff in the background. And in order for us to be able to access the SDDC or the basically vCenter and NSX and all the other stuff, we need to have our firewall rules set up. So I'm going to go in and create a group under networking and security. And since we want to access the management instances for the appliances, we are going through the management gateway, the MGW, and setting up the rule there. So I'm just entering in the side ranges for my on-premises, the lab networks. The 10.42.0 is the management, the vCenter, etc. on-prem, and the 10.70, etc. are for primarily the normal VM networks. If you look at the diagrams that were there in the beginning, you can see there's a 10.80 as well, which is used for vMotion. So now we've added our ranges in there, our side ranges to the management side, and we're also going to create a compute group. Now for testing purposes, I have just created a network segment here, which I'm going to add into this group. This is just for testing really. You can skip this if you like, but it's always handy to have a test network in there to compare stuff with or to troubleshoot with. So I'm putting that in this compute group as well, on the CGW. So then we can now create the firewall rules. So on the management gateway, the MGW, we add an inbound rule for vCenter. And of course the sources for that will be our on-premises networks, the side ranges that we just added. So we go to user-defined groups and we select our lab networks. Destination of course is vCenter, since this is a rule for accessing vCenter. We will create a similar one for HCX later on, once that is deployed, but since HCX is still deploying at this point, it doesn't show up as an option in here. Now to allow the CGW networks to have access to the internet, and for us to have access to them from the VPN link that I'm using, we are going to create an inbound and outbound rules for the CGW as well. If I can spell to segments. So for the outbound, we just do select those segments, the group that we created earlier, and apply that to all uplinks. That's all good. And then we create an inbound rule as well, and we can apply that to we won't apply that to all the uplinks, but we can apply that to the intranet interface. And there we go. That's the internet interface selected, and we should be able to publish that now. The internet being the link that goes between the SDDC and our on-prem environment. Let's just test this and see if that actually worked. And for that, we go into settings and we can copy out the FQDN for vCenter through here. And then see if that resolves now to that private IP address. I'm just going to do a little ping and see what happens. And that seems to be quite fine. So it's the 10.2 network, which is the MGW network, the side range for the management gateway in the SDDC. So we verified that we can ping it from here and that it resolves to the private IP. Now we can actually access it as well. We just copy and paste that in and access vCenter. Username and password we can, as usual, just get from the VMware Cloud and AWS console like this. Just copy that out. And there we are. So now we can access the vCenter from our on-premises lab, and we are using a private IP address, so that goes over the VPN. And we can see now that HCX Cloud Manager in the management resource pool has started deploying itself, but it's not yet up and running, so we'll give that a few more minutes. Now we're going to change. HCX has now finished deploying itself. It does take up to 30-40 minutes sometimes. I'll skip ahead here. So let's create a rule to access HCX as well, and to make sure HCX can access the outside world. But to start with, just like we did for vCenter, we need to change this to use the private IP instead of the public IP for us to be able to access this over the VPN. And once that's done, the group is already done, the inventory group, so all we need to do is to create the firewall rule. And since this is a management appliance, we do that via the MGW, the management gateway, and create an outbound and inbound rule for HCX. And for the inbound rule, of course, we use our own group that we defined earlier on with the on-premises side ranges. And just switch on all the services there and publish it. So that looks good. Now HCX, the HCX appliance can also access the outside world, and the outside world, at least our lab, can access it. So let's verify that we now can get to it. And that seems to be working okay. Yeah, no problem. And like the vCenter is, of course, is on a 10.2 side range. So we can now go through the burger menu and access HCX. We can see our location in the world, and that we still haven't done anything since we haven't got anything set up yet. So how do you download the appliance that is to be deployed on-prem? Well, you go to the administration tab here and request a download link. This can sometimes take a ridiculously long time. I don't know why. I finally, after a long while, managed to download this, and you could, if you have to wait for a long time, go to your VMware account and see if you have HCX available as a downloadable file through there. That might be a better option, actually. or give your VMware contact a shout. Anyway, so we are deploying the HCX connector, which is the one that we usually deploy then on-prem, whereas you have HCX Cloud in the VMware Cloud and AWS location. And just go through and deploy this wherever you want. For the network, I'm setting this to the management network, which is VLAN 420. That's the same one as my vCenter, etc. is deployed into. I'm just copying and pasting, or pasting in the password for this, because that's easier than typing it. Now I have given my local DNS a name for this HCX installation. Since we are deploying version 4.3.2, I just named that HCX 4.3. And we have an IP address assigned to it there. So I'll just type that in, give it the full FQDN as well, the local lab FQDN is there, and we'll give it the default gateway and subnet mask and the whole thing. And then we'll set up the DNS and NTP. I'm not going to bother with any static routes for this. If you have more complex environments, you may need to do that, but in this case, it's connected more or less directly to the vCenter on the same network. And ready to deploy. It'll take a few moments to deploy itself, and once it's up and running, we can access it. So I've skipped ahead here a little bit, and you can access it on the FQDN that you set for it, and 9443 as the port number. And this is for the management side, right? The appliance management side. And then later on, once we have set up all the settings that we need to do here and linked it with the vCenter, we can use our SSO details. And here you have admin as the user, lowercase a, and the password that you set for it previously when you deployed the appliance. And again, this is for the appliance management side. Now, the first thing you need to do is to activate this. So you need a license key. So where do you get that from? Well, you go to the VMware Cloud and AWS console, and under these add-ons, you go to activation keys for HCX, and you do it for the HCX connector, of course, and you get your key here. Just copy and paste that out. And do the activation. This can take a minute or two as well. I'm going to skip ahead a bit. So now we have access to the appliance. It is licensed, and we can go ahead with the configuration. So the first thing you should do is to link this with the vCenter server. And that's easy, of course, just add in the FQDN and the credentials that you want to use. Then we need to set up a single sign-on with single sign-on. Actually here, we need to restart the services. So web and application service, right? So which you can do here, obviously, through the appliance summary. So restart those services, and after that we can set up single sign-on. So the SSO provider, if you use something external, enter that here. I'm just using vCenter for it, so I'm going to enter in the vCenter URL. And then something is quite important here, which is the HCX role mapping. So which user groups in your SSO domain have access to managing HCX. And by default here is vsphere.local. And you may have something different. Like in our case, it's lab.jonamiki.com. So you may need to update this to make sure that that matches with what you have for your SSO domain. And then whatever group you feel would have access then to manage HCX. And you will use a user in this administrators group later on to log on to this appliance. And you can also set the location for the data center or the lab in this case. And that'll show up in a nice map in HCX later on. So now we can just take that FQDM for HCX and enter it as is. So access it on port 443 instead of 9443. And here you use your credentials from your vCenter or from your SSO domain. So I'm just using the administrator user for vCenter. And that's what I'm going to use to manage this thing with. And then we can get to the HCX dashboard locally. And now we can pair the two sites, so the on-premises environment with VMware Cloud and AWS. Now keep in mind we changed in this case HCX to use a private IP address, so this pairing will take place over that VPN link that I'm using. And if you have HCX or if you have a similar setup as you can do that too, otherwise use the internet one, that is fine too, it doesn't really matter. Now the username and password here is the same as you would have for vCenter in VMware Cloud and AWS. I'm just going to go and copy out the password. You can see where I got that cloud admin user from as well. It's right from the same place. That's from there. And just copy out the password. And we paste that in here and we should be able to link these two. And you can do bidirectional linking, but by default HCX connector does not support incoming connections. So you can't do it in normal case, but if you have two SDDCs, for example, you can link them dual, both ways. So now we're looking at the HCX installation on the VMware Cloud and AWS side. And here we're looking at the interconnect and network profiles. So right now, you see we have an external network, and in the external network, we have two external IP addresses. We also have the management network, which is using private IPs. And the direct connect network has nothing in there, no IP pools. And we have a compute profile created as well, and that one for uplink is using the external network as well. So at the moment, if we were to pair with this now, or create a service mesh, it would go over the internet using those public IP addresses. Now first of all, if we go back now to HCX in our on-prem environment, we are going to create a network profile to start with. Now we have a few different things to choose from in here. Now, first of all, I'm going to create an uplink network profile, and I'm just picking a network that has access to the outside world, really. That's all you need. It could be any one of these three. And these are, as you can see, connected to a VDS, but it don't have to be. The network that you're going to extend later on, the L2 extension networks, have to be connected to a VDS. HCX doesn't support normal vSwitches. For network extension, that is. And then we just check it here for HCX uplink. And this will make it easier when we add this on later on. We create the service mesh, since we tag them in here. We can actually name this something a bit more appropriate, so we know what this is. And that'll also make it more easy and intuitive later on when we use this. Then we have one of our three networks. We create another one, and we need a network for the management side. And this is the same VLAN that the vCenter is on, and the same VLAN that the HCX appliance is installed on. And just take a range here of IPs that are free. You don't need that many. I'm just going to wing it here, to be honest. And put in the default, the default gateway and your subnet mask, and you're good to go. And we're going to tag this as well as management. And actually, we should probably name that a bit better. Let's go back and add management to this so that we know what it is. Beautiful. Okay. Now, we also need to connect to the vMotion network. And my vMotion network is a VLAN 10.80 with the 10.80 CIDR, and I don't have a VDS port group for that. So I'm going to add that here. So VLAN 800 and an IP range of 10.80. So after adding that, I can go in and add another network profile, and as you see, the vMotion one is listed. And you just give that a network range in here as well. So it is important, you need to have one leg in the vMotion network. It doesn't matter if it is routable from somewhere else, you have to have one leg in there. And you can get away with less IP addresses in this. I'm just going to put something in here for the sake of having something. And then we can just tag this as vMotion and replication. I guess it doesn't really matter. vMotion is, to be honest, is the only thing that you actually need. Replication probably should be on the management network anyway, but anywho. So now we have three. We have the uplink, we have the management, and we have the vMotion networks. And that's all we need from the network profile side. So now we can use those network profiles and create a compute profile. Let's give that some name. Now in this video, I'm going to set up a network or a service mesh across public internet to start with. So I'm just going to name that here, but you can name it anything. You don't have to have a public internet. If you're using a private IP address range later on, you can just name that private or something else. And we can select the resources from here. By default, it'll default to the cluster that you have. And you can put that on some data store. I'm just going to use vSAN for mine, since it's got the most space. And now it's tagged. You can see that green exclamation mark thing there. So since we tagged them earlier on, it's easier to find here when you add them in the compute profile. So the management network profile and the uplink, of course, we have as well, and that's been tagged, so that is also highlighted. And vMotion. And the replication side. So that is set to management already, so that's fine. Let's just leave it at that. Now you can only really extend VDS anyway, so that's really the only option you're going to have. So there you go. So it tells you a bit about what it's going to do. And that's all fine. I'm just going to go on and continue, and there we have our compute profile. Now you got some options here. You can go on and configure this using private IP ranges, or you can do public. So if you want to do private, you can skip ahead to 49 minutes 50 seconds. And if you want to do private, you can just do this. Or public, you can just do this. So for public, you can do over internet, or you can do, well, the L2 extension is always going to go over internet, but you can also have your management traffic over a VPN. So in this case, you're just going to go and create a service mesh. Our management traffic is over the VPN anyway, and the L2 extension traffic is going to go over the internet to start with. Honestly, the profile that we set up here on-prem doesn't really matter as much as on the VMware Cloud and AWS side, because the VMware Cloud and AWS side is set to use public IP addresses for the uplink, and therefore that is going to go over the internet regardless of what we do here. Just going to go ahead and create this. It's just pretty much next, since we already set up and configured everything in our network profiles and compute profile. And just name that something wonderful here. I'm just going to add public internet for clarification that that's what we're doing in this case. And we can see that go ahead. I'm going to skip a bit so we don't have to sit here and wait for it. But you will now deploy the IX appliance and the NE, the network extension, and WO for WAN optimization. And when that's done, we got our service mesh. We can look at our appliances. Let's refresh that and see. And everything is up. Tunnel status is good. And if you look at our uplink there, you can see that's public IP addresses being used. So, as we mentioned, that goes over the internet. Now the appliances are all red. Let's refresh, and they're all green. Everything's good. Now, we can just take this and extend an on-prem network just to verify that our service mesh functions. And later on we will migrate a VM from on-prem to VMware Cloud and AWS just to see that that works. We just pick, as you can see, it will hide any networks that are not on a VDS or a distributed switch. And we got a bunch of test VMs here, and they are connected to this 701 VLAN. So we just take that VLAN and extend that to the cloud. And it'll be available both on-prem and in VMware Cloud and AWS. You could enable mobility optimized networking. I'm just going to skip it here. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. It is for free with VMware Cloud and AWS. Be very careful what you enter here for the default gateway and IP address. Or sorry, the subnet mask. It will not tell you if you're wrong. It just won't work later on. So be careful. And just refresh that. You can see that it's starting to create the network extension, and it'll take like 5-10 minutes. I'm just going to skip ahead a bit. We don't have to wait for that. And there's done. We can now see that we have our local VLAN and we have the remote one, which is prefixed with L2E for layer 2 extension. So if you look at our VMware Cloud and AWS side, the network segments that are in there, we will have the one that was in there before, as well as our extended network, which is listed as disconnected because NSXT doesn't manage this. The default gateway is still on-prem. But that's fine, that's what we want for L2 extended networks. So I deployed a test VM in VMware Cloud and AWS, and you can see that it's using the 192.168.54 network. I'm just going to change that over to the network that we just extended, just for fun, and just to show that it can pick up an IP address from the on-premises DHCP server. And in order to make sure that the VM notices the change, I will disconnect and reconnect the network cable there. Just going to reconnect that now, and that should give it a new IP address. Just go and do knife config again, and you see that, yep, that has changed now to a 10.70.1. So that has got an IP address from our local on-premises network, even though the VM is in the cloud. Let's do a live migration, just again to verify that this works. Go into migration in HCX, and we're going to select some VMs to migrate. You can do bulk in here if you want to. You can migrate multiple at a time. If you do a live migration, they will flip over one at a time in sequence, but just do one at this moment. It's enough. In here, since we are using managed service, we have to pick the compute resource pool, not the management one. We also have to specify a folder that we have access to and the storage that we have access to, which is going to be the workload data store. And vMotion for the method. We could set a schedule if we want, but in this case we don't bother. HCX knows that the network is extended, that this VM is connected to, so it will automatically fill that in for us so that the network remains connected throughout the transfer. And just start the migration and let that go. We can go and track that through the migration management and tracking tab in HCX. You can see this both from the on-prem side and VMware Cloud and AWS. And now if we flip to vCenter in VMware Cloud and AWS, we can, through here as well, in the recent tasks, see that it is being migrated, and we can see the status there. It'll take you like maybe 8 minutes or so for a VM with not that much storage. And that's done, and the VM now that used to be on-prem is now in the workloads folder in VMware Cloud and AWS, so everything has worked perfectly fine. And that's done, really. Now, if you want to do this over a private network, for example DX, or which is in this case a VPN, you have a few options. So you could do a DX like this, a private VIF going directly to the SDDC, or in this case I got a VPN that goes to a TGW and then peers with a VTGW. Now if you want to use a VPN, this is the only way to do it, because a VPN that terminates on the SDDC will not be supported for L2 extended networks. So here we are going on our on-prem environment. You don't have to do this really, but I'm going to change the name just to highlight that we are using a private network this time, and that is on the private side, on the on-premises side of HCX. And just go through next. We're not going to change any settings. The network settings are fine the way they were from the beginning when we set this up first. Just the name for clarity. And the real change will be done on the HCX side in VMware Cloud and AWS, which we are going to do next. So go in on VMware Cloud and AWS, go to the HCX side and the burger menu, and we are going to modify our network profiles. So right now we have this this direct connect network, and that is set to be private, and that is also, at the moment you can see that the compute profile is using the external network, and if you look at that you can see that you have these public IP addresses there, which is what we used initially. But now we're going to go and change this. So on the direct connect network we're going to add some IP addresses for the IP pools. And this is pretty interesting. You can add anything really in here, an unused network, class A, B, C or whatever, private network. I'm just going to arbitrarily just take one that isn't in use, which is this 10.252.200, and add some IPs in there. This network does not exist anywhere. It doesn't exist in NSXT, it doesn't exist on-prem, it doesn't exist anywhere. You're just creating this stuff here. You can put your gateway to whatever you want to have. And since we're using this for an uplink, we're going to highlight that here. This network will be created later on. At the moment it is not visible or advertised anywhere. So if you look here, you can have a look at, right now I'm going via Transit Connect, since I'm using the VTGW. You can look at the advertised routes, and you see that it's the MGW and the CGW networks that are advertised on-prem. This one doesn't exist. So now we're just going to create this, or update it, and later on, once we create the service mesh, you'll find that this will be added to the networks that are advertised to on-prem. So the network profile is created. Now we can update the compute profile. So instead of using this external network, we will set it to use the direct connect network that we just modified. You don't have to change anything else. You just go ahead and use this. So here, uplink. You go in and we uncheck the external one and check the direct connect network that we just added the IP addresses to. And then we go through and finish this off. Actually, going to make sure that this is correct. Yeah, that should be the management app. I don't know why that wasn't checked, but anyway. Okay, so then we're done with that. You can see now the uplink has changed to Direct Connect Network 1. Now on the on-prem side, we can now kick off the service mesh creation. We create just pick our compute profiles, and since we have done all the hard work now in the background previously, creating the network profiles and the compute profiles, there's very little we have to actually change here. You can just essentially do next, and go through this whole thing. And give it some nice name at the end. I guess doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna name this private network so that we have that name in there. And now you see the tunnel status is down after deploying this. So that is because I haven't added the routes, the static routes to my transit gateway. So I'm going to do that. But it doesn't really matter. Let's go in and have a look first at the VMware Cloud and AWS console. The advertised routes now should include the new network that we specified previously, and it does. So that is now being created in NSX on the VMware Cloud and AWS side. So to get this to come up, we're just going to ping this. This is not going to work since the line isn't up. We haven't added the static routes, but just for illustrating that it doesn't work, I guess. Just going to ping that. And I'll go into the VMware Cloud on AWS console, or actually the AWS console, and I'm going to add this in. So we add this network and select an attachment for it. Sorry about all the pixelization. It's just trying to maintain some security. And wonderfully, when you copy this out, it has a space in the beginning to make it even more difficult to do this. Anywho, so if you look at the routes now, we should have the 10.252.200 network, and that is indeed in there. And if we ping it now, we can see that it is indeed working perfectly fine. Now with this configured, we can do a network extension across this service mesh. Just going to illustrate that works. Again, we will extend this 701 VLAN, which is what our on-prem test VMs are connected to. This time I just switch on MON, Mobility Optimized Networking, just for the kicks. And again, make sure that when you enter this IP address that you enter it correctly. It will not tell you if you're wrong, and it'll just not work later. So for this, I will skip ahead so we don't have to wait for this to be extended. It should take about 10 minutes or so, but I'll skip ahead. And the extension is now done. And we can see there that we have our cloud side L2E version of our on-premises VLAN. And now we can use this to migrate VMs from the on-prem DC. You can actually see here the HCX creates this when you deploy the service mesh. The HCX creates this appliance, which is a fake ESXi server, VMware Mobility Platform server. So we migrated number 01 earlier, so we just migrate 02 now of the test VMs. And do the same thing as we did before. Just gonna select the appropriate compute container folder and all the other stuff. Making sure that since it's a managed service, we pick the ones that we have access to. And we'll do my live migration in this case as well. Network, of course, HCX is already aware that this is an extended network, and it will fill this in for you automatically. So we validate, and we go, and then we can track this through the HCX console. So this again will take about 10 minutes or so, but it'll take more depending on how much storage your VM has. I'll skip ahead until that's done. You can see that the migration is now complete. And from the VMware Cloud and AWS vCenter, we should be able to see this VM is there as well. And yeah, no problem at all. So that's all there's to it. I hope this has been informative. If you have any interest, just check out youwannamake.com. Thank you.